So if you haven't downloaded the case study document yet, make sure you do so those as we're going through the material. So I'm going to start off today with a quick pre-assessment question, and then what I'm going to do is digress for just a moment to talk about some other housekeeping things as you're thinking about this particular question. So the question is, who's the individual or organization that actually uses cloud services? So is that going to be the cloud carrier, the cloud consumer, the cloud broker, or the cloud auditor? So feel free in the chat to go ahead and post your answer in there, and then the housekeeping things. So I don't know if anyone in this training, I think a few people were at least on the live session that Joe Perry and I did yesterday. So we kind of have an intro to IT and cybersecurity course going on. Really just talking about some different career paths, etc. So that'll be running the next couple of weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. So if you know anyone that's kind of like, yeah, I kind of want to get into IT, or I'm in IT and maybe I want to jump into cybersecurity, or also if you know recruiters that, those recruiters that are posting terrible job postings out there and not knowing really what their focus is, or what the focus should be for a job posting, definitely have all of them tune in. So feel free to share that information with them. It's a free course, so anybody can take it and go through and watch those sessions. So again, that's running the next couple of weeks. We have a session tomorrow. So we've kind of broken that out, and I know I'm getting off topic here a little bit, but we kind of broken that out with each one of us kind of leading it, and then the other person will be on the session doing a little bantering and that sort of stuff, making it a little more fun. So enough digressing there. Go ahead and make sure you answer this question in the chat. So just go ahead and post your responses in there. And I'm going to go ahead and just answer this one so we can jump through the material. So the answer here is that it's going to be the cloud consumer, right? So if you think about that, who's actually using the service, just like if we were using anything else, right? If we were using our laptop or desktop, we would be the consumer in that aspect if we're using that product. Or if we're searching like Amazon and finding stuff and buying stuff, for example, we would be the consumer on Amazon buying stuff and searching around and using it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what is the cloud? Like, why do we even care? What is this cloud stuff people talk about? I think most people nowadays know what the cloud is in some capacity, but I always like to sum it up in the easiest form of saying you're taking your information, putting them on somebody else's computers. That's really what the cloud is. Of course, we've got different aspects of it where we can, from a business standpoint, and we'll talk about those, of doing things like platform as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. But at the end of the day, we're really taking our data and putting it in somebody else's computers. So with that being said, we generally want to kind of keep that in mind, the aspect of we're putting it on somebody else's computers when we start talking about shared responsibilities, right, and separation of responsibility. So this is a good diagram I found that kind of breaks that down. So if we as a company are hosting everything ourselves, right? So we've got our servers, we've got virtualization, we've got all our software being developed internally, then we're hosting all that stuff, right? So that's on-premise solutions, and that's going to be very, very expensive, especially as we try to scale things up. However, with the Magical Cloud, we can actually offload a lot of that stuff, right? So we can save a lot of money, we can scale up and down. We'll talk about the benefits of the cloud a little later on, but we can scale up and down pretty easily. So we have infrastructure as a service, so that's going to be, as the name implies, our infrastructure. So the cloud provider is responsible for all the servers and infrastructure. And then we are responsible for the applications, the middleware that's running those applications, the operating systems in many cases, but we're responsible for that angle of it. We've also got platform as a service, where they basically handle just about everything for us, and then we just run our applications and do our development stuff on top of that. And then software as a service, where they just handle everything. So something like your Amazon Prime, you don't have to host Amazon at all. You just go to a web browser, you type it in, you search for products on Amazon, and then you're able to use that. Probably a better example, there's like Netflix or Hulu, something like that, where they're hosting everything. You just basically download an app, you pay for the service, and you're able to use it. Shared responsibility. So I like this diagram that Amazon AWS provides. So basically, we as Amazon, we're giving you this, right? So we're handling all these things for you. And then as a customer, you're responsible for the security of all these other things, right? So, your data, all that stuff, Of course, we're responsible as Amazon for a certain aspect of the data, right? So we have to make sure we're meeting certain criteria that we tell you that we're going to meet. But overall, we kind of shift that responsibility on you. Different cloud deployment models that you'll need to know for the CEH exam. So private, community, and hybrid, and also public. So public, as the name implies, anybody can access it. Private is going to be more an internal cloud. So think of like an intranet, so to speak, where you can host different things for users to download, software updates, etc. Community cloud. So these are going to be things where we have like a shared interest or we're held to like a similar compliance level. So for example, like in healthcare, right? So let's say that I'm a nonprofit hospice or something like that. And so I have data that I need to use the cloud for that's relevant. And then I find that there's some hospitals in the area as well that have the same types of compliance issues, right? So excuse me, standards that they have to follow. So things like HIPAA, HITECH, etc. So we all have to follow these things. So we could potentially use a community cloud and upload certain data. Obviously we don't want to upload anything internal, but we can use the cloud in a community cloud aspect to share certain information that might be relevant to everybody because we have that similar interest. Now, again, there's an aspect there of security, right? Do you really want to share certain things with other organizations? Hybrid cloud, which is basically just a combination of any of these. So a lot of times you'll see that with a public and private cloud more so than you see at the other ones. But there's aspects there that could be included in that. So like private and community could go together. Public and community to some extent could go together. But generally the most common you see is private and public for the hybrid cloud. And then of course, as I mentioned, public is just anybody can access it. So NIST Cloud Computing Reference Architecture. So I kind of liked this model, and so I wanted to just show it to everybody. Obviously, if you go to the NIST website right now in the shutdown, you can't download a lot of the documents, but you can access a lot of things on the site still. Again, digressing there a bit. So I like this aspect because it kind of shows you like, okay, well, who's the broker? What do they do? Who's the cloud service provider? Kind of what do they do? Who's the cloud auditor? What are the things that they do? And then, of course, we all know what the cloud consumer is. That's us, or the organization using the cloud. So benefits of the cloud, as I mentioned, obviously we can scale things up or down, so that's elasticity. It saves a lot of money for organizations, so we can reduce, infrastructure costs as well as, cost to develop software. So we have faster software development on the cloud, where we can use, the platform as a service and build things out and build things on scale a lot quicker than trying to, gen up more servers, et cetera, et cetera. It's for the most part more reliable. So a lot of services like AWS or Microsoft Azure, based on what you're paying for, they'll guarantee a certain percentage of uptime for your data, so that way you can access things, etc. So with that being said, it kind of gives you that aspect of better business continuity, better disaster recovery because you've got things in the cloud. And if one data center fails for like Amazon, for example, you can have your data in another one, and you can it might be a little delay of like 20 minutes or an hour or something like that, but you could still get back up and running as a company. Whereas if you had it all on site and a tornado come through and wiped out your building, you'd have a very difficult time trying to get things built back up and start running your company. In fact, a lot of companies back in the day would go out of business because a disaster in their area would occur and they couldn't get things back up and running. So virtualization is something we've kind of talked about throughout this course. Really, all it is essentially the ability to run multiple, environments on a single piece of hardware. So partly where this came from was the fact that as an organization we might be using servers, and we use them for certain aspects, but we had all this extra space available where we could do different things. So we kind of started virtualization along those lines. More so in like corporate America to try to take away like the workstation environment as far as running the software on there, so we can just run it on a server and then have users access that from their particular workstation. Cloud threats that you'll just want to be familiar with for the exam itself. Data breach, goes without saying, right? Especially as we look at different media stories out there. We notice that a lot of things have been lost data-wise. I know myself, I've been part of breaches. It's never fun. And it's always, you always get those emails like, hey, by the way, we lost your data. We're so sorry. Like, does that really make it any better? No, of course not. Other threats are insider threats, right? So, for example, if we're using like Dropbox or something like that in our company, it's actually pretty easy for someone in our company to take that data that's in a Dropbox folder, for example, and then share that, or upload it to their own Dropbox, and then from there, disseminate it out to wherever they want to do with it. Account hijacking is a common attack in the cloud, as is DDoS, excuse me, not DDoS, DDoS, distributed denial of service. So those are a couple of the main threats there. Insecure APIs as well from a development standpoint, but mostly you're going to see account hijacking and DDoS attacks, as well as data loss as well. Cloud computing attacks, side channel and cross guest VM attacks. So basically, that's where we're hopping in basically a virtual environment. So we're on the same hardware as that. Like let's say that I'm a healthcare company and you're a criminal attacker. You're on the same hardware environment as I am, and so then you're doing the cross-guest VM attacks to basically take over my session. It's one of those attacks that, sure, it's possible, but it's kind of like, why would you necessarily do that if you're already on the hardware? There's a lot easier ways to do things. So SQL injection is the next one, wrapping attack, which is basically a SOAP type of attack. So the attacker intercepts the SOAP messages, and then they basically just change the data in the envelope. So it'd be like, it's kind of like if I was sitting outside your mailbox, the post office person came, I said, oh yeah, I live here. I took the envelope, I opened it up, I changed the contents of the envelope, I closed it again, and put it back in your mailbox. You would have no idea essentially what I was changing. Hopefully you would have no idea. Man in the middle along those lines as well. Is a common attack that we see in the cloud. And basically, and with that, we're taking over the session, and we're trying to take over the session. We can do that by sniffing. This is just a basic diagram to kind of show you what that might look like of an attacker going through the process of taking over the session. We've kind of covered that already throughout this course of session hijacking, and it's all that exact same thing. We're just doing it in the cloud. Session hijacking we can do by cross-site scripting as well. Again, all this is related to just session hijacking, so different methodologies we can use to take over the session. DNS amplification. So basically what this one is we spoof the IP address of our target machine, so our target server or whatever. We spoof the IP address, then we send our DNS request through our own botnet. From there it hits pings a bunch of DNS servers, and then all those DNS servers are going to send the responses back to that spoofed IP address. So the goal here is to basically knock out that victim system. Cloud security, so different controls that we could use with cloud security based off the particular layer of the OSI model here. So application, layer of cloud security. But a lot of this is similar to the OSI model in the aspect of physical. We have our network layer, applications, etc. But just understanding that there's different controls we can put in place. However, nothing is 100% secure, as we've seen as we go throughout this entire course. Different considerations. So obviously we want to figure out, like, before we use the cloud, or if we're using a cloud and we're trying to gen up a new instance or something, or a new server, we want to ask ourselves, okay, if this data on this particular thing going to be critical? Is it critical to our company functioning? If yes, number one, we need to put encryption in place, but start asking ourselves more questions like, okay, well, how can we secure this data better? What configurations do we need to do on this particular server to make it a little more secure than other ones? What kind of monitoring do we need to put in place? Also, can I move the data, right? So if I'm putting up data in the cloud, if I don't like that provider, can I easily move my data to somebody else? Like if I don't like Microsoft Azure, for example, can I move that data to AWS pretty easily? Are there a lot of barriers in place where I can't do that? Availability. So, is my data actually available to me? Or do I have to go through a bunch of red tape to get it? Along those lines, disaster recovery planning, business continuity planning. How easy is it to perform backups, right? Are there backups of the data? If so, where are those stored? Are they stored, securely, or are they stored in plain text? What's going on with my backups? What's the cloud service provider doing with those? As I mentioned already, encryption, who owns the data? So, as I'm backing stuff up, potentially, like, is a cloud service provider, do they own the data? Where if I want to take it someplace else, I can't actually do so. And then also the vendor, we want to make sure that they're reputable, that they've gone through certain things, that they guarantee certain things as well, from a security standpoint of steps they take, processes they put in place to try to reduce risk. So all these are critical questions that we want to ask ourselves as we're going to be implementing a cloud environment. So different security controls, but we want to make sure that our controls essentially match what the business wants to do, right? So matching those business functions, encrypting the data, so again in transport and at rest, tracking any changes. So again, that goes back to the monitoring. And we also want to make sure we authenticate people and continuously authenticate people, throughout the session. So for example, let's say that I'm logged into Dropbox and I save my username and password so I don't have to log in again. Every time I come back into my computer and I go to Dropbox, at a certain point it's going to log me out after X number of times, or X number of sessions genning up, and that way that's a security thing. Place to just make sure that every so often I have to re-authenticate myself in that particular system. Best practices, as I mentioned, encryption, so end-to-end encryption. So as I'm accessing this cloud environment, I want to make sure all the data path is encryption. So as I'm traveling along on the road, I want to make sure it's a secure tunnel, so to speak, of the data. As I mentioned already, encryption at rest, incident response vulnerabilities. So if we notice vulnerabilities in the cloud environment, is the provider fixing those, or are they kind of putting that burden on us to try to mitigate those? As well as incident response, when something happens, what are we doing? What steps are we taking to try to respond to that incident, mitigate it, and hopefully resolve it, and learn from it where we can mitigate stuff in the future as well. Data retention policies are a good best practice to put in place. Like how are we, securing our data? What things are we doing to retain that data to keep it from an insider threat losing it, or even the cloud service provider using it? Role-based access controls can work to a certain extent. You also may want to figure out, like at a level, what's someone doing that particular task or that step in the process, what they would be doing, and then from there build the credentials off that. And the access off of that, and that way, when you have someone that needs to do that particular function, if someone else is sick or something, you can easily grant that access. Virtual private cloud, so that's another option as well. And then also keeping in mind that make sure that the cloud service provider has appropriate compliance certification. So, for example, if you're working in the fintech industry, or if you're working in healthcare, you need to know like what compliance issues are in place and what providers that can give you that information and basically say like, look, we are certified in HIPAA, we are certified in HITECH, we are certified in SOX, we are PCI DSS and compliant. So make sure that you're vetting these vendors to make sure they can actually do what your organization needs. Just a quick security checklist. You can go to like OWASP and stuff like that and do those as well. This is just basically like, what do I need to take away to go to a cloud service provider and kind of go down the list of like, okay, are they enforcing privacy policies? Are they, are ensuring proper protection of the data? What are they doing essentially? And then also us internally, right? So as a company, what are we doing? Are we ensuring, risk and compliance? Are we monitoring our data? Are we securing our data? Do we have processes in place to audit the information and the processes and make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to? So again, all these things are for the cloud service provider as well as us as an organization. Different tools that you can use, to kind of test security. Not an all-inclusive list by any means. And also you can just use things like Burp Suite that we've already talked about to test the website that you're going. So for example, I probably wouldn't do it on Dropbox because that'd be technically hacking, criminal and hacking without permission. But if you have your own website or something like that, you can definitely test these different tools against it, test Burp Suite against it, and just kind of play around and pretend you're a cloud service provider and see what types of vulnerabilities you find and figure out ways to mitigate those. So that way, as you're going to a cloud service provider, you can ask those hard questions and say, look, I know that a lot of common vulnerabilities are these things, and what are you doing to mitigate these risks? And also, have you found other risks? And if I find risk as a company, what are you doing to mitigate those? What's your process for that? Pen testing in the cloud. So the biggest thing to think about here, or the biggest things are actually on this list. So the cloud stack itself. So what are the steps in the process to access everything in the cloud? And then also, can we access those things, right? Because a lot of times cloud service providers will allow you to do like a pen test, but it's a very, very light pen test, right? So we can't like access certain servers or even servers for that matter. We might just be able to access like the applications we're running in the cloud and just test those. So we want to make sure we ask those questions to the cloud service provider of saying, look, we're using infrastructure as a service, or we're using a platform as a service. We're using you for that. So like, what can we do on our end to test for vulnerabilities and look for actual exploits and find potentially 0 days as well? So we want to make sure we understand what the shared responsibility is and what the shared access is as far as like what we can actually do. And then also along the lines of jurisdiction, right? Because if Amazon's has our data like here in the U.S. and then they also have it, let's say they have they don't have this right now, but let's say they have something in Russia where they're hosting the data. We may not be able to actually go touch that data that's sitting there in Russia in a pen test, but maybe we can here in the U.S. So understanding the different jurisdictions and how they apply to our data and where it's stored at in the cloud is very beneficial as a pen tester. So I've got a few post-assessment questions here, and then we're going to jump into the case studies. I just want to kind of test your knowledge of what we've covered so far. So feel free to post in the chat. I'll kind of monitor the chat. is this true or false? More rapid software releases are a benefit of cloud computing. So as a benefit of cloud computing, is that one of the benefits where we can push out software releases a lot faster and build software faster? So go ahead and post your answers in the chat. We'll see what your answers are there. So again, just answer true or false in the chat and just let us know what you think. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this question or each of these questions. I'll just go ahead and answer them. And then what we'll also do is then we'll move into the case studies and we'll kind of go through those as well. So with the case studies, again, just post in the chat your responses on those. So I'm going to go ahead and answer this. So true, right? So we all kind of knew that one. More rapid software development is definitely a benefit of cloud computing. The next question here, the cloud deployment model that has an infrastructure that's shared by several organizations who have shared concerns. So things like compliance, regulations, etc. So which one is that? Is it going to be private, community, public, or hybrid? So again, feel free to post that in the chat and just let us know what you think. I'm just going to pause for another second or so here. And I do notice there's a slight delay in the video, at least on my side. So I'm going to pause for another second or so here. All right, so if you answered B, community cloud, that's actually the correct answer, right? So as we discussed, those organizations share certain compliance or regulatory or legal concerns, and so they share that knowledge in that particular environment. As we mentioned, private cloud is the internal cloud, essentially. Public cloud, anybody can access, so it's something like Netflix, Hulu, where you pay like the subscription fee, and then you can access it. And it's also like things like the free version of like Dropbox, where you can put your files in the cloud, and or like Google Drive type of stuff, where you can do that, or Google Docs, etc. Basically anything free or low cost that the public can access. And then finally, in this type of attack, the attacker must have a virtual machine that's placed on the same physical location, so the same physical hardware as a potential victim. So which one of these is that? We kind of talked about that a little bit. All right, so again, make sure you post your answer in the chat. We'll take a look at that, and then we're going to jump into our case studies right after this. All right, so the answer here is going to be the side channel. So again, that's where we are sitting next to our, basically we have access to the hardware. So we're sitting next to our potential target, and our virtual environment is on there. So we've somehow managed to get access to the actual hardware. So again, not the most common attack you would ever see in the wild at all. It's possible, it's been tested like in the lab, but again, it's not something that you would generally see out in the wild. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our case studies now, just to make sure we stay on track time-wise. I think we're actually going to get done early today, just because we don't have a lab, but I just want to stay on track with things. So let's go ahead and jump into our case study documents here real quick. So be sure to download this if you haven't already. So we're just going to jump right into it. So again, post your answers to the questions in the chat there, just so we can be a little more interactive on the stuff. And don't forget that next week we have our regular sessions, right? So we have our Monday, Wednesday sessions. There's no holiday next week. So Monday session will be cryptography, and then we'll finally jump into the reporting, and then we'll move into, again, the final week of just testing, doing the quiz questions, and just kind of wrapping things up. So case study number 1 here, Jennifer, she's an IT manager. So she's trying to basically save money and offload the IT infrastructure to the cloud, right? So she's trying to save money, reduce, the resource use, and have an ability to kind of scale up. So question number 1 here, which type of cloud computing service is kind of the best option for her? So is it, and I'll kind of give the answers here, is it going to be platform, infrastructure, or software as a service? Which one's kind of the best one for her? So feel free to let us know your thoughts in the chat there, and I'll pause for a moment to give everyone a chance to catch up. Cool. Yep. So I see Andre already answered. So yeah, infrastructure as a service is the best option there. Again, the question's kind of easy in the aspect we mentioned infrastructure in it, but it's just letting us know like, hey, okay, we're going to offload all those servers and all that other stuff that we need normally in a network. Question number 2, what are some things that she should consider as a part of basically offloading that, right? So as a part of that service, what are some things she needs to think about? So whether that's from a resource standpoint or security standpoint, what are some things that you guys and Gales think about that she needs to consider as part of that process? So again, feel free to post that in the chat, and we'll see what kind of responses we get. Now we will have a lab on Monday, so it's going to be a run. So I'm going to run it off a Windows virtual machine. So we're not going to cover the setup of that. So if you have a Windows machine, or if you just have that you're using, or if you just have if you want to just grab a Windows virtual machine, that's fine as well. I will try to grab a link as well. I think I still have a link to like a Windows XP machine that you can just throw like inside a VirtualBox. Basically, you just need that type of environment. In lieu of that, you can just find I'm trying to think now, a hash calculator and a hex editor. So hash calculator, hex editor, tools for your particular computer. So like if you're using a Mac, just Google search a hex editor and also a hash calculator for your particular device. And then also do that if you have a Linux machine as well. So we're not going to cover the setup of those next on Monday, but I'll walk you through the lab. I'll have a step-by-step guide that walks you through that as well. And essentially what we're going to be doing is just looking at a couple of images with those tools. So it may be something that on Monday you may not necessarily follow along in the lab, because it's going to be somewhat fast-paced, because we're going to do several parts to it. But like I said, I will have a step-by-step guide so you can walk through it yourself. And go through the process. Now, we can't do it inside of the Cybrary lab environments simply because of the security settings. It will not allow us to look at images and crack them open and stuff. So we're just going to do this like either in your own virtual machine or just locally on your computer. So I know I digressed a bit there, but I just want to talk about next week a little bit. So going back to the question, what are some things that you should consider? I see we've got some good things about encryption. So again, end-to-end encryption is a great answer there. So great job on that, Larry. I see a few other people mention that as well. So good job. Backing up, absolutely. You know, so like how are backups being done? You know, by the cloud service provider? Is that something we can control? I think you were saying maybe data loss prevention. As well. So I think that's a good idea as well. Like, you know, what are they doing with our data? Are they putting things in place? And is there a risk, right? Do they have an incident response? So if they lose our data, like what's the process there? You know, migration, right? That's a good idea as well, right? So how are we taking all our infrastructure and like putting it up in the magical cloud, right? So we need to talk through and also make sure the provider, they've done this, right? They've all done it before, but they have different levels usually of like, okay, we have a engineer that will work with you through the entire process, but the cost is this, you know, and so if that's not feasible, hey, here's, you know, documentation where you can go figure it out yourself. All right, cool. Yeah. So authentication, authorization, I think that's great. You know, so what kind of you know, processes are we putting in place to make sure that we're the only people accessing our data and not somebody else? So yeah, phenomenal. Yeah, and then also yeah, restrictions like IP whitelisting. So great job on that, Andre. Awesome. So great job, guys. Great job. All right, we're going to move on to our next case study here. We've got 5 of them today, so we're just going to kind of crank through these. And then, like I said, we're probably going to get done early, so we should have time to open it up for some questions. So George, here in case study number 2, George works at a healthcare nonprofit, and he's trying to figure out like what kind of, you know, cloud deployment model should he use. So he knows that, you know, there's several other healthcare companies in his particular city that's, you know, they've got different similar, you know, compliance requirements. So things like HIPAA, HITECH, you know, they've got to follow those things. You know, even here where I'm located in Texas, you know, we've got state things that they have to follow as well as local laws as well. So he's trying to like kind of figure out an environment where he would be able to work with these other companies and kind of share information. So getting to that, question number 1, which type of cloud deployment model should George choose in this type of scenario? So go ahead and post your answers in the chat there. So again, he's really just trying to say, okay, well, there's all these other companies in town that have similar interests and requirements as my company. What kind of cloud deployment model should I be choosing? And I'm not going to give you a hint on this one, so I just want to see if you guys can answer this one, and we'll take a look and see what your responses are. So just if you want to go peek at the PowerPoint real quick, that's totally fine. But I'm not going to give you any hints on it. All right, cool. Yep. So I see Andre jumped in there, and yeah, community cloud is cloud deployment model is the correct answer there. Yep. So again, as we talked about earlier, it's basically organizations or, you know, even individuals that have a similar interest. Generally, it's organizations, though. But basically things like compliance, laws, regulations, etc., that they have to follow, and then they can share good data and best practices on that information. Question number 2, what are some security concerns with that particular model? So with the community cloud deployment model, what are some considerations that we need to take from a security standpoint? So again, go ahead and post your answers in the chat. We'll take a look what everyone says there. And you'll notice that a lot of, I'll give this hint, you'll notice that a lot of the security considerations across any type of deployment model we're doing are somewhat similar, right? So there's a lot of things that have similarities. So we'll see what you guys and gals say, but go ahead and just answer that question. What are some security considerations? So again, we kind of answered this already to some extent, but go ahead and feel free to say the same answers. That's totally fine. And on my end, I'm just going to refresh my page real quick. It kind of timed out on me here, just so I can make sure I see everybody's answers. And the neat thing about all this is there's no F, right? You don't fail. You get 100% each time, as long as you're answering the questions. Cool. So I see data encryption. Absolutely, yeah. So like, how are we encrypting our data in there? What kind of data are we sharing? Also, I like the idea about HIPAA compliance. So, like, what kind of information can we actually share, right? So obviously, we can't share, like, if I work for one hospital and there's another one in the community cloud there. I can't share like patient-specific information. I can't say like, oh yeah, Joe Perry, our director of research, yeah, he got his, here's his medical record. I can't do that, right? But I could potentially say, yeah, we have, X number of, foot, ankle sprains or whatever each year, and here's the data on that. So that's something that I probably could share with, other hospitals to show like our best practices and how we go through the process of, fixing that particular issue for a patient. So absolutely, great idea about, the HIPAA and also any other type of compliance that we need to be held accountable for. We need to understand like what kind of data can we actually share with others based off those things that we have to follow. So access, yeah, that's another good one as well. So that's a great answer there. So yeah, access, like how are we preventing these other companies from, so basically how are we keeping them accessing the stuff we want them to see, and how are we preventing them from accessing like everything else, that's on our private cloud or something like that. So absolutely a great answer there. We want to make sure we have some kind of process in place where we're restricting the answer, the access to that other organization or those other organizations. Cool. We'll move on to our next case study now. So Juan, so he's a business analyst for We Love Cats, and we all love cats and dogs, right? And fish and everything else. So basically what he's doing is he's going to be putting together a presentation for the C-suite that outlines some of the benefits of cloud computing to the organization. So with that being said, so with him, hey, I need to outline different benefits to the organization by from cloud computing. So what are some of the benefits of cloud computing? So what are some of the benefits that we talked about for a company with cloud computing? So as they move to cloud computing, what are some of the benefits for them? So again, feel free to post in the chat and just let us know what your thoughts are, like some of the benefits of cloud computing. And again, benefits that maybe you've had in your own life. So if you've had any benefits directly of looking at or YouTube or something like that, that could be a benefit as well. So cool. So I see Larry said cost, absolutely. And that's one of actually the driving factors as cloud computing became more popular and companies started being open to it. That was a good selling point. It's like, hey, we don't have to have all this cost. We can just put it up on and put the burden on somebody else. And then as we scale as a company, that's one less thing to worry about. We basically have a subscription fee each month, and that's all we have to worry about. Yep, ease of software updates. Yeah, absolutely. We can just disseminate software updates on scale with cloud computing. That's absolutely a great answer there. Security, yeah, it can help us be more secure. So, traditionally we would have to make sure we had all these firewalls, et cetera, in place. But with cloud computing, we can, gen up different things, right? We could gen up servers, firewalls, DMZs. We can gen up honeypots, et cetera. So all that, we can gen up on scale. So we can basically just segment out our network a lot better. Availability, yeah. So I really like that answer there. So yeah, cloud computing, that's one of the other big aspects of it. We can put our data up there, and then if a hurricane happens or something in our area and wipes out the building, our users just need an internet connection, right? So they can go to another city or wherever they're at, gen up a laptop, and then access our cloud environment and keep working. Keep being productive. We could still have money in the company, and so we can essentially survive. The other aspect with the availability is we can have employees in other countries, right? So we see that a lot with bigger companies, like you'll have companies in the UK or in Pakistan or something like that doing projects, and we're able to do that with cloud computing. Uptime guaranteed. Yep. So again, going back to the availability. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as we kind of mentioned, elasticity, scaling up and down. So yeah, very good answers there. Cool. All right, so question number 2 here. What are some other things that Juan should include in his presentation? So not just the benefits of cloud computing, but kind of what else should he include in there? Like what kind of other information do you guys and gals think that would be relevant to present to the board or to present to the C-suite? Okay, so I'm kind of refreshing my page real quick on mine. It kind of locked up on me there. So again, just go ahead and answer that question. So what are some of the other things that you think that Juan should include in his presentation to the C-suite or executive management? Cool. Yeah, that's some really great answers. Cool. So yeah, the current state, like where are we at right now in the company? What are the costs to moving to the cloud versus the cost of staying with our current path? Absolutely. Governance and security, right? So how are we more compliant? And that's actually a really good one, especially in the C-suite and the board. If you're presenting to them, say like, look, here's the compliance angle of it, and this is why we should do this. Yep. So good. The cost. Yep. Good deal. Yes, and actually that's a critical one right there. We can make sure that the cat photo is available to everybody. So that's one aspect of the cloud as well. So yeah, great answer there. Cool. Yeah, security of ADA systems up to date. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So updates are a big burden on organizations. Having to roll that out. What happens if something goes amiss? So the cloud makes it a lot easier to roll stuff out and roll it back a lot easier, where we can take images of our servers, et cetera, take snapshots. Essentially is what I'm saying there. Take a snapshot and then just roll back to it. So it makes it a lot easier when you roll out an update or something or a new piece of software. If everything breaks, then you can just roll things back to the good state. So awesome. Yeah, good. Really good responses, everybody. Awesome. So study number 4, and then we just have case study number 5, and we'll wrap things up. So case study number 4, Chris is working as a penetration tester. So basically what he's doing is he's planning to intercept SOAP messages, and then he's going to change the data in the envelope to show a potential attack to the client. So what kind of attack is that? So if you remember my example, I stand in front of your mailbox. The mail person hands me the envelope. I open it up. I alter the data inside of that. I close the envelope, and I put it back in your mailbox. What kind of attack is that? So go ahead and post in the chat what kind of attack you feel that is. And so I see that John also mentioned on the previous case study transfer of risk. So yeah, again, when you're presenting, when Juan is presenting to the board or to the C-suite, he can mention that like, hey, look, we're putting X amount of risk back, to this other company, and we don't have to worry about that. And that saves us X amount of dollars, or that frees up X number of resources that we can use for other stuff. All right, so I see some of the responses are regarding man in the middle. So kind of, sort of, not necessarily the answer I'm looking for. So I'm trying to look for a very specific type of attack that could, allow you to do a man in the middle attack. We're essentially in the communication stream, but I'm looking for a specific attack. All right, yep, so Larry actually just got it. So wrapping attack. So that's the name I'm looking for. Really, I want you to just kind of remember that for the exam. So if you see them asking about like, hey, SOAP messaging, and we're trying to change the data in the envelope or something like that, just understand what kind of attack that is. So wrapping attack. So still kind of sort of right with the man in the middle, because it does allow you to do that, but really looking for a very granular name there with the wrapping attack. So good job, everyone, by the way. Just good job on that. So now if Chris wanted to go ahead and, as part of his next attack on the company, if you want to spoof one of the company's server IP addresses and then basically send a bunch of request to that particular IP address from DNS servers, what kind of attack would that be? So again, be very specific on the naming of that particular attack. So we talked about it earlier, so just go ahead and answer in the chat what you think that attack is. I'm going to refresh my page. I've had a few issues on my on my laptop here. We had some thunderstorms throughout the day today, so and it's still going on. So it's kind of in and out of some of the connectivity wireless wise. Again, post in there for question number 2, what you think that type of attack is. So again, be very specific. So you're along the correct lines with the spoofing aspect, because again, we're spoofing the IP address. So not really DNS spoofing. So yeah, Larry got it. So that's what we were looking for, the DNS amplification attack. So we're not spoofing like DNS server information, so it's not really that. But we are spoofing that IP address to try to get responses from the server. So that's kind of what we're looking for, is that very specific name again in this one. So I know this we're a little tough just because we're looking for a specific name there. Now it is a form of DDoS or DOS if you're just using like one DNS server, but it is a form of DDoS attack. So you are on the right track there, Joel. But again, all good answers there. The purpose of all these is to kind of get your mind thinking along the lines of for the exam, to kind of prepare you a little better for it. All right, so our last case study here, Kirsten, and by the way, that is a real name, and she is a cybersecurity engineer. I won't say her last name because I don't want to embarrass her. But basically, Kirsten's tasked with helping to implement a new cloud solution for her company. So what are some of the security considerations that she needs to have with a cloud solution? So any type of cloud solution, what are some security considerations based off the different solutions that we could have? So go ahead and post that in the chat there, and just let us know what you think. So you'll notice a trend with a lot of these case studies. It's kind of getting your mind wrapped around the security aspect of it, different types of attacks that might occur, as well as like considerations and benefits of cloud environments. So the reason I'm doing that, and I always like to give a reason on things, so I'm not just going mad or anything like that. The reason I'm doing that is to help you prepare better for the exam and life more so in general. So the CEH is a lot of memorization, and then go dump it on the exam. But I want to prepare you for thinking through cloud environments and the things that you need to use on a day-to-day basis. If you decide to work in any capacity in an organization, you'll probably be dealing with the cloud. So these are all things you want to think through, especially if you decide to go the engineering route and kind of build out the architecture of environments. You're definitely going to be working with the cloud. All right, so again, just I know I digressed there just for a moment, but again, what are the security considerations that Kirsten needs to have? So I see that Sandy posted, things like authentication, authorization. So basically the access control of things, like, who's accessing our data. Are we putting checks in place where they have to go, re-authenticate? Or are we just letting things, out there where everyone can do it? Encryption, yes, absolutely. How are we encrypting our data? Again, we're trying to make it more secure, right? So we're encrypting it through the entire process, so at rest and in transit. Shared tenancy, absolutely. So again, that community cloud environment. So what kind of data are we providing there, as well as like what are we putting in place to stop those other companies or other users from getting our data that we don't want to share with them. All right, yeah. So along those lines, like what kind of security are we using, based off the particular service that we're getting, right? So if we're using like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service, so based off those different aspects we're using in a company, security related to those individual aspects, right? So like public cloud, we probably know like we're not putting any, information we don't want public out there, but our private cloud, maybe we're using that in some capacity, and we're using that, a platform as a service to do software and development. How are we securing that, and how are we preventing other people from getting to it, right? Absolutely. So and on the security angle, the availability of information, do we have backups in case of a ransomware attack? I actually know a organization recently that reached out to me and mentioned they had a ransomware attack that affected their cloud environment. So fortunately, they had backups and they were able to restore from the backups. But again, a lot of companies don't do that simple stuff, right? They don't do the backups, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now you with like a forensic tool and spend days or even weeks trying to sift through the data and get something meaningful that you can allow give back to the company so they can continue operations. So yeah, access rules kind of goes back to the access control angle there. Yeah, so yeah, John, it all comes back to the CIA triad, confidentiality and integrity, excuse me, and availability. Absolutely. Yeah, so who's again backups is mentioned by Larry. Ownership, so also along those lines, can we actually move the data, right? So are we allowed to move the data from one cloud provider to the other, or if we want to move it, like just offload it from the cloud and move it on our internal systems, are we allowed to do that, or can we not do that? And also, how easy is it to do that? So yeah, sure, a lot of providers will say, yeah, of course, you can move the data, but how easy it to actually implement that solution? And also, yeah, internal security training as well. So, sure, we can put up the cloud, but then what are our users doing? Are they going to malicious sites? What kind of stuff are they doing? Are they staying logged into stuff when they shouldn't be? So, yeah, absolutely, great idea there. So, any other thoughts you guys or girls have on things that Kirsten might need to consider from a security aspect for a cloud environment? All right, cool. So any other ideas? Go ahead and throw them in there. I know we're really early today. So okay, vendor access. Yep, absolutely. So what kind of access are we allowing vendors to have to our particular environment? What kind of data are we sharing with them? Absolutely great answer, Andre. I want to go ahead and actually open it up for questions now. I know, like I mentioned, we're a little early today, but that's okay. We don't mind getting done early. If only you guys' workday would end a little early, right? And you got to go home early. So go ahead and feel free in the chat to ask any questions that you may have on today, and I'll try to get those answered for you. If you need to hop off because you're at work or something like that, feel free to do so now. Just don't forget we have our session on Monday. Again, we're going to be covering cryptography, and at a very high level. I want to stress that. We're just going to touch on a few topics and then jump into our lab. Now, as I mentioned with the lab, we're just going to we're kind of putting on our forensic hats, so to speak. So we're just going to kind of walk through the lab at that point and talk about why we would kind of have a certain mentality and how it's going to benefit you as a penetration tester of thinking through these angles where the data might be. So again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to post them in the chat. And I'm not sure. I think the archives. I didn't take a look at them. I think the archives are updated to the latest modules, or maybe just a module or two behind. But if not, the team will work on that and get those updated as well. And I did mention as well, as I'm waiting for questions here, I'm just kind of digressing a bit.